we are an active open channel to governments on both sides, identifying, encouraging, and pushing practical and efficient support for Ukraine. But our main task is to facilitate bilateral B2B, business-to-business contacts and arranging business arenas where companies can meet and talk business. And we have been doing this since 2008. We have over 120 members from both countries and are growing. And actually, we see an increased interest from Norwegian companies now that want to get engaged and contribute with their business to help Ukraine develop and take advantage of its immense potential, even during this terrible war. And I do want to express my deepest sympathy with and regret for the suffering of the Ukrainian people caused by the ongoing, unprovoked and criminal attack by Russia. The resulting suffering and destruction is plain for everyone to see, and the attack on a democratic and independent nation sets a chilling precedent for the lengths autocratic states are willing to go to assert their twisted view of the world. These actions must be resisted by the free world at any cost. And Russia's actions, on the other hand, serve to cement Ukraine's long-term commitment to and need for Euro-Atlantic integration, and further galvanizes the support of its international partners. And the war has, of course, had devastating effects on the Ukrainian economy, as well as the global supply chains. Despite this, the trade between our countries continues. The businesses are finding new ways to carry on with it, which is vital for the Ukrainian economy. The Norwegian government is working on different initiatives which may help Ukraine reduce the financial impact of the war and during the rebuilding process. The war between Russia and Ukraine is not only a traditional war with heavy weapons and soldiers, but it's also a digital one. Cyber and informational warfare plays a significant role in this and other wars. For instance, in some European countries, the number of cyber attacks from Russia on public media and governmental homepages has increased in the last few weeks. Also, businesses are impacted by cyber warfare. In Norway alone, the number of cyber attacks has increased by 42% compared with the same period in 2021. This shows the importance and need of cyber competence and technology that may prevent such cyber attacks. And I'm sure that Stein Mollerhaug, who is the expert here, the leading expert in data security, will tell you more about this. And on that note, I would like to pass the word to Stein. Please, Stein, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction. One feels very small in a situation like this. But, you know, when you're building an anthill, each ant is very small. The sum of the efforts of the ants is what makes the anthill. So I think it's that point of view we should start off with. I'm going to share my screen now. There's going to be a presentation up there. Just a second. My name is Stein Mollerhaug. I am Norwegian. I have friends in Ukraine. Like everyone else in the sensible part of the world, I'm outraged by what's happening in Ukraine. And we're trying to do whatever we can to help, however little it may be, even if we're just carrying a piece of a pine needle to the anthill. Now, I'm going to talk to you about information warfare, also about cyber war and information operations, because these are very tightly linked. And we're seeing the full spectrum now. And I'm going to talk a little about what Ukraine is up against, and I'm going to also talk a bit about how Putin is succeeding actually in a few areas. And I'm going to talk to you about how to build competency. I was supposed to be in Ukraine in March to teach the first CISSP course in Ukraine. Obviously, that didn't happen. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to deliver the knowledge from abroad. So the introduction here is this is all about what's happening in the world today. It's happening in Ukraine, it's happening in Norway, it's happening in Sweden, US, all over the world. But it's especially happening in Ukraine. And the agenda is an introduction. We are going to talk a little bit about power and corruption and what truth is, basis for modern information warfare, And I'm going to be not following a very strict structure here, but I'm going to cover all these subjects here. There will be ample possibilities for questions and answers at the end of my presentation, and I sincerely hope that you have some questions. And so we are going to go through this. I won't be able to see you raising hands or something because I'm using full screens here. But if you ask questions in chat, I will see them once the presentation finishes. So who am I and why am I speaking on these subjects here? Well, I'm a former journalist, I'm a former army officer, paramedic. I entered the strange field of information science in 1976 and was immediately told by my father that I was educating myself to unemployment because this information science thing was not something that was going to happen. It was going to be an exotic study for nerds, and nobody would be hiring my services if I took this education. So obviously he was wrong. My father rarely admitted to being wrong, but he did so in 1992, that maybe this information science had something sensible going on. So in 1981, I got an offer I couldn't refuse from Digital Equipment Corporation. And Digital Equipment Corporation was then the #3 computer vendor in the world. I actually joined Digital. That was interesting. I started off as a support specialist, worked my way through developer, through project manager, pre-sales specialist, executive consultant, the latter. I was in Digital a total of 19 years. So in 1986, something strange happened because one of my customers were hacked. And that changed my career a lot. I have since 1986 been working more or less full time in various roles all over the world to actually work with computer security. Already in the early 90s, we were warning about the possibilities of cyber war. That was considered to be science fiction in those days, but it wasn't science fiction. And a lot of the things that happened in the 90s form the basis for what's happening today. I hold a lot of certifications. I'm not going to be going into them, but I'm authorized to teach a lot of the international certification courses, and I've been teaching I've been teaching 94 CISSP courses all over the world so far since I started teaching in 2008. So that is who I am. I'm not employed by any government or government agency. I'm employed by Experis, and my title here is Principal Advanced Knowledge Development Manager. So I think that's enough about me, and let's move on to this thing with cyber warfare and information warfare, because they are really two different things. Information warfare is absolutely nothing new. Information warfare has been going on for thousands of years. You have been trying to form an opinion in people to get these people to work for your goals. So it's about manipulation of information that is trusted by a target audience, but the target audience may and may not be aware that this information is not correct. Why do I say may and may not be aware? If they are aware it's not correct, why are they acting on it? Well, the answer to that is very simple. If people don't get enough information, they will accept whatever information is there, and they will accept that information as truth. This is an opening to understanding what is happening in Russia. Me, like many others, say, why aren't the Russian population screaming out? Russia has attacked another country. According to Putin, they haven't attacked. It's a special operation. And he's selling this to his people. And because of the absence of independent news media in Russia, he's able to sell this because it's the only information available. Therefore, the tendency to trust it is high. Of course, there are other information sources. The informed people in Russia, they know how to find them. They get past firewalls and border gateways. They manage to find information. But those are not the masses. Those are the few people. So his information warfare is really aimed not as much as the Western world, because we hear what Putin say and we don't believe him. Therefore, his information warfare is less successful against us, but it has been extremely successful against his own people. Then we have what we call the cyber warfare, which is what we warned against in the early 90s that would be happening, which is where you attack computers, software, you attack command and control systems, you try to get into military system, you try to sabotage infrastructure. That's the other aspect of that. That is the active attacking. And what has happened, on some of these slides, there's some little word of wisdom at the very bottom here. And the word of wisdom on this slide is, you must look at facts because they look at you. And that was Winston Churchill, something he said. Now, cyber warfare and information warfare, in these days, it has merged. It's very difficult to see the difference between the two, because the same people that are behind the cyber warfare also participate in using cyber warfare to project their falsified image of the world out in into the masses. So what we do is we call this now information operations, which causes covers information warfare and cyber warfare. As I said, information warfare is absolutely nothing new, and it's being fought not just with computers. It's being fought in people-to-people interactions. It's being fought by dropping leaflets. It has been fought by BBC, for example. As long as we had the Iron Curtain up in Europe, well, it's coming up again, but that's another story. As long as we had the Iron Curtain up in Europe, BBC was blasting on high signal strength, long wave transmissions into Eastern Europe from presenting them the news that the Soviet leaders didn't want them to hear. So information warfare has been fought in the long wave range band. Why long wave? Well, simply because it's able to carry a long distance, and it also bounces off the atmosphere, so you can actually transmit beyond the curvature of the Earth. So cyber warfare, information warfare can also be that you have an enemy surrounded and you start bombing them with information, surrender and everything will be good. If you don't surrender, we will hunt you down to the last person and kill every one of you. These are the things that they are running information warfare on. However, information warfare combined with traditional warfare is something we see in Ukraine, because there is no really reason to be bombing schools and hospitals or private residences. This is about scaring the people, about creating a split in Ukraine between people and their leaders, because the people are suffering so much. So it's the hope that the Russians will turn against them. And if you look into that light, you can also see why Putin is not wanting to negotiate. He wants to break the spirit of the Ukrainian people with physical warfare, with cyber warfare, and with information warfare. And he wants the people of Ukraine to come over to his side. One can very much hope that he will succeed in this, but the perception of reality in Kremlin hasn't always been the best over the last years. Now, we are talking about information operations, and information operations, it actually covers the whole spectrum. So one thing is jamming or spoofing of electronic signals. Why would Putin use rockets against a TV tower in Kiev? Well, he did so because he realized, his troops realized that Ukrainians were using Telegram via the mobile network to send intelligence information to Ukrainian leadership. And he thought by knocking out that tower that he would be able to knock out all the data transfers over the air in Ukraine, which was, of course, totally wrong. Ukraine had built resiliency into the network, but they had some disruptions from that. One of the key areas is also propaganda. Telling people you have no option, telling people we will be able to waltz over you. That's another thing. Then we are into disabling supply chains by actually physically attacking the supply chains or hacking the supply chains. We have seen such attacks on supply chains in Norway. The Nortura, producer of meat in Norway, was hacked, and the hackers were traced back to Russia. This was in peacetime. It was last year, and they had their systems out of commission for nearly 2 weeks as a result of this attack, which was a direct attack on supply chains, on the food supply chain to Norway. Thankfully, Nortura managed to still be producing. Also, they were not the only vendor. So what we see is that this attack was probably just an exercise, like a military exercise, where they looked at a specific target and saw how long they could take it out for. Another thing that we see happening now, which is a combination of information warfare and cyber warfare, is manipulation of markets. It's been since the 90s. The system has been pump and dump. Pump and dump. How does that happen? Well, they find some stock, maybe stock worth $0.5 per share. Now they use the same channels as you would be using in propaganda to actually push this information that this company, they found gold in Alaska. Largest gold stash that was ever seen in Alaska. And the stock price is going to go right up. And people start spreading that rumor, and people start buying this. And pretty soon, they're not trading at $0.5, they're trading at $5, which is a quite substantial increase, right? 10-fold increase. But the people behind these pump and dump operations, what they then do is when the stock hits the high mark, they start selling out. And then suddenly people realize that there's nothing behind these rumors, and they're left with valueless stock, well, that they bought at $5 a piece, and it's really not worth anything. So manipulation of markets is very possible. If I'm going to guess on what the next moves from Russia will be, there will be a hefty element of market manipulation. But it is because of what's happened already, it's very difficult for Putin to be able to succeed with this. It's been much more difficult since the invasion. Before the invasion, they probably would have been able to pump and dump stock and make hefty profits from such operations. That's also part of information warfare. Of course, collection of intelligence information, Ukraine's brilliant tactic with Telegram, people calling in. But the other way, when you do it as cyber warfare, you try to get into the enemy's information systems. And now you try to get information out from that. And I would be very surprised if this is not a high priority operation of the Russians to get into not just the military systems of Ukraine, but also into the infrastructure to be collecting information. A lot of weapons are moving from the West into Ukraine, and it would be extremely valuable for the military of Russia to know when and which equipment would be moving at which time along which routes. Now, can they find that from the military systems? Yeah, absolutely. But the military systems are usually well guarded. Can they find it from civilian systems? Yeah, probably. Suddenly you see a lot of diesel being fueled in Poland, right? A higher than normal amount of diesel fueled in Poland. That can be indicative that there are a high amount of trucks ready to go there. Of course, they will supplement this with satellite surveillance, but the Russian satellites are not as effective as the Western satellites. They also have fewer of them. Command and control systems is where you're giving the order to fire. Now imagine if Ukrainian hackers managed to hack the command and control system of the Russians to actually direct their artillery towards the Russian positions. Well, that would be pretty hefty coup. Well, the Russians are trying the opposite. They're trying to actually have get into the Ukrainian command and control system to see what information they can get out, but also to infect or affect, sorry, the operations of the military. So analytics of communication, that's very efficient today. When you see 55,000 cell phones moving from Belarus to Donbass, you know, you have a pretty good idea about what's going to happen. So sometimes, even if you can't get inside the communication, just the fact that communication is happening can be enough to actually reveal what is really, really going on. So this is the patterns created by metadata, which can often give you a very good insight into what is happening. Part of this is also mass psychology. I already mentioned a little about the mass psychology, and what I mentioned about the mass psychology was the fact that in the absence of information, people tend to believe that information that is available, which is why it was extremely important for Putin to shut down Western sources to at least the masses of Russia. But he is fully realistic. He knows he can't shut down everything. But for him, you know, 10,000 people protesting at the Red Square, not a big problem. He will just put out 20,000 police officers. However, 5 million people protesting at the Red Square would be beyond his capability to handle. He would have to march up his military and start shooting blindly into the masses. And that is something not even Putin would survive in Russia. So applying mass psychology to things is something that you really, really, really have to take into consideration when we're talking about information warfare. Mass psychology, how effective it is, was demonstrated by some students at Santa Monica Beach in Los Angeles. On a warm summer day, a lot of people in the water, they were playing some sounds over the loudspeakers. They were playing dum, 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 dum. And that is the sound that played in Jaws in 1974 when Jaws was made. Whenever the revengeful shark approached, they were playing dum, 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 dum. And the students, they played that on the loudspeakers, and it took 30 seconds and there were nobody in the water. Why? Because there has been a mass psychology applied here. People associated this sound with the fear for sharks. And creating such connections is something that the Russians are actually quite good at. Mass psychology is something where we absolutely can learn a lot from the Russians. However, their ability to apply it has become limited by the war. So if you can get control over a person's knowledge, you can control how they think. If you can control how they think, you can control their actions. So that's the key principle of information warfare. So it's been used by almost every ruler in history. It's been used for good and it's been used for bad. Churchill's speeches during the last World War kept up the morale of the British people. And he made some immortal statements like, if you're going through hell, keep on going. He also said this is not the end, beginning of the end, but it is the end of the beginning, things like that. Britain will not fall, and so on. So yeah, he was sort of information warfaring against his own people. He was doing it for the good of the people, but an attacker will be doing it for the bad of the people. So key principles of information warfare is to control what people know, thereby controlling what they think. Modern warfare had a technology. You don't have to fly a plane over London anymore and drop leaflets telling them that the Germans will invade Britain and that they should surrender. You don't do it like that anymore. You use the troll factories. You are active on social media. You plant rumors. You really, really are working the thing here, using the full spectrum. I skipped democracy is, after all, based on informed people that care. But dictatorship is based on misinformed people and people that don't care. So I skipped that last one here on the previous one, which is from Churchill. Craft is common to both skill and deceit. So both the defender and the attacker uses craft. Let's conclude this, that information warfare has mostly been successful inside Russia itself, as Putin has taken systematically control over all media in Russia. And those that have access to foreign media, they're too few. That's how Putin wants it. It's easy for Russians to accept what they are told as long as they feel safe and have food. It's said that if you take the bread and housing away from the Russian people, they will rebel immediately. Martin Luther King said we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. And that's probably what is very relevant to the current situation. We must know what the enemy is doing. We must also be prepared to meet the enemy with our own counterattacks. So, information warfare didn't start when Russia invaded Ukraine. It didn't start when Russia took over Crimea. Information warfare, Putin's information warfare, started long before that. Because he's been waging cyber war against his own people and the rest of the world since the first day he came into power. He couldn't have started the Ukrainian war before he had shaped the opinion of the Russian people. And I hear stories about people who have relatives in Russia, and they call their relatives on the phone, and the relatives say, "Why did Ukraine attack Russia? I thought you were a peaceful people." So yeah, he's managed to even split families. And the people that sit inside Russia, they see a totally different world picture than us on the outside. And this is a world picture that's formed by Putin to his specific needs. His need to have the Russian people not meddle in the military business. So the Russian people were the first victims of his cyber war. Problem, of course, is that if these people become enlightened, if these people find out that he's misled them, then his whole basis of power will crumble. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Again, a quote from the wise Mr. Martin Luther King. This is a key point here. Putin controls the opinion of the Russian people. Now, part of what Ukraine must do is use their communication channels to Russia to persuade them, and persuade enough of them, that what Putin is doing is terribly wrong. Because right now, he's seen as a hero by his own people. There is this thing about power and corruption, and I'm going to jump to this text at the bottom of the slide right away. absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's believed to be first spoken by John Emmerich Edward Dahlberg Acton, the first Baron of Acton, in sometimes between 1834 and 1912, probably closer to the later one because he was probably not that smart as a kid. So we have to remind people about some of the key things here. Any politician is elected to office to serve the people, but the corrupt politicians, they serve themselves at the expense of the people. Based on that definition, I would definitely say that Putin is corrupt. Cyber war is used to gain or sustain corrupted power. If you let information float free, of course, there will be some people saying that, yeah, you're getting chips in the vaccines, you know, and Bill Gates can control your mind and all the other shit, but it will even itself out. Because the people who are serious, the people who supply good information that you can verify, those people will eventually prevail. So transparency and a free press are the most effective weapons against this. And in Norwegian folklore, we have these trolls here, the ugly, evil creatures that live out in the forest and the mountains. And the folklore says that these trolls will turn to stone if they're exposed to the bright light of the sun. And this is basically what you have to do in terms of information warfare. You must bring in the light of the sun. You must make sure that people really know what's going on, which may mean a frustrating call to somebody in Russia where they say, oh, Ukraine attacks Russia, but you have to listen. You have to ask them to verify their facts. You have to ask them where they have the facts from. And you will find that in all these cases, they have the facts from the official news media of Russia. So power and corruption is very prevalent in Russia at the moment. And you have collected almost absolute power in the circle around Mr. Putin. In information warfare, lies play a key role. So truth can be damaging or beneficial to your purpose, depending on who sees the truth supporting their case. So damaging truths, they can be countered with lies repeated enough times. This is the Joseph Goebbels principle, made famous during World War II by Joseph Goebbels. So yeah, there was some damaging information from BBC in London about the Germans not winning everything and about the Allies successfully landing in France. But he kept repeating it. Glory is there. We are on the verge of winning this. The Allies had made a last desperate attempt and Germany will soon rule Europe. This is what Goebbels said. Yeah, it is very important to know that the lies are key to anyone who doesn't have a just cause in their war. And again, to Martin Luther King, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And this is one of the things we need to do. Everyone in every contact with anybody who is misled by the Russian authorities, they should be standing by their truths. They should be arguing strongly, and they should also seek good information to form the basis of their opinions. So that was one aspect of it. Let's have a look into cyber warfare. And let's just say that Russia uses cyber warfare extensively in Ukraine and in the rest of Europe, right? There are attempted attacks on the infrastructure. There are attempted attacks to win the opinion. Those are the least successful of these attacks. There are attacks to confuse and scare people, to scare people into surrendering, and attempts to deny problematic facts. Russia has barely lost soldiers in Ukraine, if you believe the Russian propaganda. Having people who are serving their mandatory military service sent to a war zone against the laws of Russia itself is a very problematic fact. it is a fact that Putin very strongly attempts to deny is happening. Remember, US Senator Warren Johnson in 1918 said, "In war, truth is the first casualty." It's always the first casualty. That goes a little back to information warfare. So, April 27, 2022, there was an article, and Microsoft says that Russia had carried out 37 computer attacks on Ukraine since the war began. Those are massive, coordinated attacks. Hackers on behalf of Russian authorities have carried, between February 23rd and April 8th, according to Microsoft. So they have played a bigger role in the conflict in Ukraine that has been publicly known, according to Microsoft again, speaking to Sky News. And Microsoft also reports that the attacks may have laid the groundwork for various military operations in the war-torn Ukraine. So Russian generals and spies have tried to make computer attacks part of their warfare while they are struggling on the battlefield. That is a statement from Johns Hopkins University professor Thomas Reed. So yeah, it's very well, it's documented. We don't speak too much about it, especially not the successful attacks during the war. Well, it's part of not making the damaging facts go on. So, foundation of information warfare, cyber operations, extensive use of computers. You're utilizing weaknesses, and this is something we're going to talk a little more about here. They are well-organized groups. They are highly paid, highly skilled, recruited amongst the best. One of the key things here, until the Ukrainian war started, was a concept called plausible deniability. Our parliament was attacked by Russians. Russians said, no, we didn't do that. We're a peaceful nation, right? And they denied everything. And because we couldn't actually grab the hackers, interrogate them, and have witness testimonies that they were working for Russian authorities, Russians got exactly what they wanted, plausible deniability. Had they taken some people, brought them to Norway, broken into the House of Parliament, and been caught, there would have been no plausible deniability. So the term of plausible deniability is very important in information warfare. Technically speaking, we can't prove that the Russians have hacked infrastructure in Ukraine, but we have a very, very strong indication that it is fact. It is a fact. Also keep this in mind, that the people, the information warriors, as they like to call them, they are remote from the battlefield. They just see intellectual challenges that need to be solved. And a statement here is, it's easy to be courageous when you're sitting behind a keyboard. It's much harder when bullets fly. Now, another thing that is opening for these attacks is lack of knowledge on the defender's part. And that lack of knowledge is something we're going to drill a little more into. Just going to check my time, okay? The weakest link is what you go after, always. And if you have 10,000 computers in your network, and they're all set up according to all security standards, they have all the state-of-the-art protection mechanisms in there, but you have one computer in that network that isn't set up correctly. Guess where the attackers are going to go? Yeah, exactly. They go for the weakest link. And you can remember what Master Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, was written circa 500 before Christ. He said, the greatest victory is the one which does not require fighting a war. This is something that opens up great possibilities for cyber war. And actually, as I said, Russia has been doing cyber war against the rest of the world. They've been doing information operations, they've been doing cyber war. as a component, and they done that against nations they are not at war with, and because of the plausible deniability thing, well, guess what? They get away with it. The cyber warrior is, as I said, always looking for the weakest link, and the principle of Master Sun Tzu is apply your greatest force against the enemy's weakest force. This is the recipe for winning war. And why am I quoting this ancient book, 500 before Christ? Well, I'm quoting it because it was one of the key inspirations for General Schwarzkopf during the Desert Storm. Many generals actually used the principles of this book here. And watching how Ukrainian forces fight with intelligence rather than just brute numbers, I strongly suspect that a lot of the Ukrainian military leaders have read the same book, because the principles of this book is actually principles about winning. And yeah, it has some good ideas. It has some things that are outdated, of course, but it has some pretty good ideas. So they go for the weakest link, and that is where we have the problem in computer security. We have, without realizing it, we made the tools that makes this possible for them. Poor programming, for example, that opens up for vulnerabilities. If you don't check an input buffer, people can put funny stuff into that input buffer and try to make your systems execute code that they shouldn't be executing. We also set up insecure computing environments. And this is the thing we're going to be talking a little more about, but the insecure computing environments are based on an old defense principle. It is based on border defense, trust but verify. But today, in today's computing environment, we really, really, really need to move away from that concept. We need to move into the concepts of zero trusts and micro borders. So many of the computing environments we set up are like just border defense. That would be just like if Ukraine put all its forces at the border against Russia, and Russia would win if they broke through. Well, that would be a pretty stupid strategy in traditional war. It is also a stupid strategy in computer security. But keep this in mind, that we are still using it in most of our computing environments. We don't use zero borders. We don't use the zero trust concepts. I've seen two reports where people have looked into computer security incidents. The first I saw was at the security seminar in Hague in 2019, where they looked into time of attack versus time of discovery. How long did it take from somebody gaining unauthorized access to a computer system until the owners of the system noticed that activity? In the first report, it was concluded that the average time over 100 examined publicly known incidents, the average time was 203 days. So that meant that on average, the intruder had been inside your computer system for 203 days. It would be like if Russia had moved all their forces in and mingled them into the Ukrainian society before they declared war. In another one by IBM a little later, they found that the number had gone up to 252 days. So intruders are most likely in your system, unnoticed. This is one of the key things to bring to the table. You have to actually be thinking in terms of securing the way you're writing your applications. You have to be thinking in the, just checking the time. You have to be securing the way you write applications. You have to be securing the way you put up systems. And there are new principles for this available to everybody with the knowledge, but it needs to be taken seriously, sorry. Insecure practices. This is the way people use computers insecurely. I have no idea how many times I've seen people at security conferences sitting with their computer there, deciding it's time for a restroom break. And even in computer security conferences, they get up, they tell the guy sitting next to them, hey, can you just keep an eye on my laptop while I'm in the bathroom? And they go away. That's an example of an insecure practice. Lack of knowledge is also a big problem because we don't really know what we should be doing, in what order, and how we should secure system. And then finally, it is the lack of it's not a lack of standards, because we have a lot of standards out there, and we have some pretty good standards. We had the NIST 800-53. We have ISO 27001 and 27701 for personal information. We have recommendations from SANS. We have recommendations from OWASP. Everything is out there, but we are not applying it. One observation here is that if you want to learn cyber warfare, you should be looking at the penetration testing people, because you shouldn't be looking at the hackers. Actually, the penetration testing people try to keep up to the skills with the hackers. They also do it in an ethical fashion. So they're not going to be arrested by the police for a well-contracted, regulated penetration test. Just like the people sitting in Kremlin hacking, they are not going to be arrested. So they have the comfort of not fearing prosecution. So cyber warfare specialists and penetration testing specialists is basically the same skill set. So we should now be applying our own penetration testers against our own systems to find the problems before the intruders find them. But even more so, we should avoid the problems going into the systems in the first place. Just reminding you of Weinberger's second law of programming. It says, if architects build houses like programmers build programs, the first woodpecker to come along would destroy our civilization. When did Weinberger write this? He wrote it in 1984. That's when he formulated his second law of programming. I was at university from 1976 to 1981. I think in 1978 or 79, I took a class called Secure Programming Practices. Hey, 1978, we had things in place for secure programming practices. What I have been most surprised of over my career is not the sophistication of the attackers, but their persistence and how easy they succeeded once they found the weakest link. And in very many cases, they're using problems we had identified back in 1978. And they are still there in the systems we are basing our production on. So where do we go for knowledge about this? Systematic knowledge. Well, we have the standards. The standard says what you should consider, not how you should consider it. We have the resources, we have SANS, we have OWASP on the network, we have many others. But one of the places where they have really put things together is in the CIS, Center for Internet Security. Not-for-profit organization, and they are aimed at actually protecting the connected world. So there's a new version out now, version 8, and it is based on the SANS top 20 security controls. So they have formulated 18 pillars that you have to build in. Just a second. Yeah, we are on track. I'm not going to go into each and every of these controls, but I'm going to highlight some of them. Inventory and control over enterprise assets is something you absolutely need to have. If you don't know you have a computer, you can't protect that computer you don't know you have. You also need to have inventory and control over software assets, because it's all too easy today to slip a Trojanized version of software into a system. Just the easiest way to do such a delivery would be to, for example, drop USB sticks in the parking lot outside the building, and all tests show that people will wonder what's on them. They will put them into their computers, and yeah, that's when you get control. sensitive data must be protected. And because of the zero trust concept, the only real protection you get is properly encrypted data. And that means good key management. It means a lot more. It's not just encrypt this file for me because it's sensitive. If you don't take good care of the key, it's not going to be protected. We talked about secure configuration and enterprise assets and software. You need to know how you're going to set up your system. Then you have users accessing them. You have the account. You need to have account management for them. If a spy managed to get a legal account on the system, they come a long way into getting into your system. You must have good access controls tied up with encryption and good key management. You need to continuously look at who's attacking you. How are they attacking us? If you don't see any attacks on an internet-facing system, you have a major problem because you're obviously missing something. All internet-facing systems are pretty much subject to attacks all the time. We need to take care of the logs, and of course, the biggest inroad on malware into most organizations is email and web browsers. We need to have malware defenses. No more need to say anything more about that. If things go wrong, we need to have data recovery. Yeah, if you don't look at what's happening with the ransomware. We need to have good network infrastructure management. We need to monitor that infrastructure. We need to defend it. Then we get into the user space where we need to make our users security aware, and we need to give them skills training. When we have service providers, which many of us has today, we move to the cloud. We no longer has this computer room with the air conditioning and all the other stuff. Now we got an URL. So service provider management is something you really need to have. If your cloud provider is being hacked, then you potentially have a hack of all the tenants of that cloud provider. Application software security needs to be built in. We need to think differently on how we make applications. There are separate courses how you're going to do that. The problem we have is all the legacy software that's out there. Software written a long time ago before people even put any priority on security. If you have an incident, you must have a way to report it, and you should be doing penetration testing of your own systems. Because if you don't do penetration, let me rephrase that. You should be doing penetration testing of your own systems, because even if you don't do it, others will do it for you, and they will not tell you what they find. So it's very important that you have good penetration testers out there. So if you look at this slide here, and I'm looking at the time here. Yeah, we still have a little more. If you're looking at this slide here, this is like a wish list for computer security aware skills. Each and every one of these can be formulated into specialities. And this is what we need. We need good people in all these areas here. And that also means that, yeah, we're talking about, yeah, we must write secure application code, right? So we have application software specialists. But we also need to have people that can talk with, influence, and affect users into thinking security. So we have a saying here in Norway, make sure your brain is up and running before you click anything. This is something we do in our introductory training in Experis as well. We tell them about this. We focus very much on security awareness skills training. That's a totally different specialty from the people who are working with application software security, which is a totally different skill set from those that work with incident response management. And penetration testing, again, another skill set. There are so many possible skill sets here that anyone who starts working with cybersecurity will be able to pick an area where they feel good, where they can specialize, where they can actually be creating a career for themselves. Knowledge is key, and we must apply it. Leonardo da Vinci said, knowledge is not enough, we must apply. This is one of his famous statements. First of all, security supports the business and must be part of the business. In Ukraine, security also supports the infrastructure and must therefore be built in with the view to protect the infrastructure. You can't do this random. Yeah, we hired this wonderful antivirus expert here. Now we're going to really have antivirus defense here. Yeah, good for you. But if you're missing out on firewalls, if you're missing out on micro segmentation, micro borders, and so on, you're not going to win anything. Remember, the attacker goes for the weakest link. If you're running user awareness training, don't insert USB sticks you found in the parking lot, right? If you're doing that, well, you're guarding against that attack. But if you at the same time leave your firewalls open, well, or you don't do micro segmentation, you're in problems anyhow. So this must be a systematic process, and you must link everything back to the business. So you must invest in knowledge, also to align security with business, and this is formulated into the principles of governance, risk management, and compliance, which is one of the three-letter buzzwords that you hear a lot today, GRC. Right. So the defenders, as a defender, you must succeed every day, and the attackers only need to succeed once. That's something to keep in mind. We offer a number of courses. We offer business-related risk-based security. We have SSCP and all these courses we will now offer to the extent we have available capacity to Ukraine for participation via network. So these are courses I teach, and the course we're going to teach later in this week is a 2-day course, which is the Experis Secure Foundation course. And you will hear a little bit more about them after I have finished. We also do Experis Security for Leaders, which has been highly successful here in Norway. We've been talking to C-level executives in organizations, and their view on computer security is not the same after we've spoken with them. I can guarantee you this. We also do the ISO courses and so on. And all of these courses here, I mentioned this Center for Internet Security, the CIS controls. All of these courses here, they agree on the same principles. Every part of the curriculum that we're running here goes back to the same principles that are formulated in Center for Internet Security. So this is what we are offering at the moment, and we also offer tailored courses for specific customers. Sorry, and before the war started, we had some great plans for introducing systematic professional security training with internationally recognized certification exams into Ukraine. So, as Churchill said, in the fight for a good cause, there can be no such thing as failure, only temporary delay of success. So we'll be back on that one. I've been told that my summary should be from 11:30 to 11:35 in the latest agenda I got, and we are now at 11:34, so we're pretty much on track. So in this case here, I would like to open for questions here, and when I go exit the presentation here, I will of course see the questions you have posted in chat. So first, I want to thank you for your attention. This is my email address. This is me in scuba gear, right? So I'm also a certified scuba diver instructor, which is very relevant learning for cybersecurity, simply because as a scuba diver instructor, you're doing continuous risk assessment. And this is also something you have to do with scuba diving, with computer security. So I try as best as I can to stand with Ukraine, and with that I'm closing this presentation here, and I am opening for questions. Very silent there. Right, just going to check the chat and a few other things here.
You have a lot of applause.
Yeah,
from the audience.
that's good. Now, one simple question I got directly to me here is, was Ukraine well enough prepared for the war from Russia, from cyber war from Russia? I don't know the details of the Russian or of the Ukrainian military and the plans and the setup. But what I'm pretty sure of is that they were as well and as poorly prepared as the rest of the world. So I think that's the best possible answer to that, because the rest of the world is not really up to fighting cyber war, right? You have special operations groups. You have land warfare office in the U.S. Army. You have, of course, the Russians. They're protecting themselves fiercely. You have North Korea. You have the Israelis. They are very good on cybersecurity, by the way. And you have a lot of these organizations. They're like islands out there, and they're fiercely protecting themselves, and they're doing things right. But you know, if you have 100 islands and no roads that link them together, you know, you're not really having effective communication, are you? So just a second, just going to look here. Got another PM here. Somebody's typing, so I'm just going to wait for that. Yeah, it's a private message here. The question is, what do you see as the #1 threat at the moment? Right. And I would say one of the it's very difficult to point out one threat, right? You have to look at the total picture. There is a big threat. Say the Russian propaganda succeeds and you're getting a split between your president and the people. You get a people that's sick and tired of war, and they can say that let them have Donbass, right? If we only get peace. So this is probably something that's high on the agenda in Moscow, to actually try to institute that split between Ukrainian people and Ukrainian leadership. And it's just, I don't have specific information on this, but it's just by applying logic. What will Kremlin do? What does Kremlin have in its power? And the reason they're bombing residential areas, the reason they're bombing hospitals, is simply part of this. And they will then show propaganda saying that, look what Ukraine caused, you know, they wanted to attack Russia. No, we're getting back at them. We're securing the Russian minorities in Donbass. And remember Goebbels, a lie repeated enough times eventually becomes a truth. This is so they're not believed today, right? But maybe they are a little more believed tomorrow, and maybe even more the day after tomorrow. But we built a modern society. We're using computers to run that society. We want these computers to follow our instructions, not the instructions from Kremlin. And one of the big things here is vulnerability management, because a lot of systems today exist with huge vulnerabilities. The only reason they haven't been hacked is that the attackers haven't found them yet, right? If the attackers find them and they get in on them, and then they can have control over them. And remember, 252 days on average between being hacked and actually discovering this. How much damage can you do in 258 days? Like, for example, hacking TV systems in Ukraine, having something with a deep fake video of your president, giving some instructions your president absolutely shouldn't be given, like put down your arms, we are going to negotiate, and so on. I haven't even mentioned that thing about deep fakes, sorry. But these are things that would typically be launched through cyber system, which is why you must absolutely protect your broadcasting systems. I've seen deepfake video that was of President Obama. You know, the guy before for that other one, the crazy one. Obama, in this video, he says that Trump was really the greatest president US has ever had. It's a fake, it's a deep fake. But they're using AI techniques. His mouth is exactly matching the words coming out. The voice is exactly the voice of Obama. And the reason you obviously think this is a deep fake is that this is something Obama would never, ever have said. But if you have your president up on TV and he says something, lips move exactly as they are, he gives instructions to lay down arms, and then every communication is dropped, right? So they sabotage the infrastructure. Well, that could be a pretty easy win, wouldn't it? These are the things you need to be considering. You're in the middle of all this. Another nation was in the middle of all this some years ago, which was Estonia. When Russia pulled out of Estonia, massive attacks started happening on their infrastructure. And the way Estonia saw this, and they have been telling so on security conferences all over the world ever since, is they instituted a baseline, the NUCC baseline for Estonia, which is a minimum standard of security that any computer connected to the network must satisfy. If it doesn't meet the standard, it's not going to be connected. What did they do? They eliminated the weakest link, right? So now, instead of finding a weak link and attacking that, they had to attack the whole surface. And actually, Estonia managed through the use of the NUCC baseline to actually stop the Russian cyber attacks on Estonia. And well, they didn't stop them, but they became ineffective. And they did so over the course of a few hectic months. And from having an infrastructure, a government infrastructure that wasn't working, until having something where they were watching the attackers and just saying, yeah, so they're at it again. Well, it was a matter of months. So it's fully possible to fix things, even if you're in the middle of a battle. But of course, it's more important now for Ukraine to fix things. Do we have any other questions here? Hey, you're so silent. Either I shocked you or you didn't understand a word I was saying. I think you understood everything I said pretty clearly. So
we got one question to our Instagram because we published like field for questions, and we have one question: is what is the difference in the situation with cybersecurity in Norway and Ukraine with the approach to cybersecurity? Maybe you have some comments.
Oh yeah, I have a few comments on that. First of all, it's just as bad, right? We had health information handled in hostile countries. We have bank transactions going to hostile countries. We have some organizations that are extremely professional, extremely clever. But you may have heard about Norsk Hydro, the attacks on Norsk Hydro, which happened through their supply chain. And they actually, it cost them about, the latest figure I heard from them was 800 million Norwegian kroner, which should be about 2.4 billion hryvnia. So yeah, so we have the instance. They're happening all the time. When it comes to Ukraine, you know, you have matured very fast. You come from a situation where you barely had computer equipment to being one of the most prominent nations in the world in supplying competency into the computer environments. But I think you still have a few of those old sins. I think you have probably a little more than Norway. So, but you're also at war. So something that's a minor nuisance here in Norway could be a major thing in Ukraine. This is something that really needs to be taken seriously. And we don't know what's going to happen. There may be frozen situation, which can drag on for years and years, which means that you should really be making very heavy investment into securing your infrastructure and making sure it is future-proof by applying the modern principles as outlined by CIS, as outlined by the ISO standards, as outlined by OWASP, just about anybody. Because the knowledge is there. It's a question of applying that knowledge to your infrastructure. Did I answer the question? Yeah.
I hope so. I will forward it to our follower. And another question is, what should be the first step for every Ukrainian IT service provider to improve cybersecurity situation in the company?
I would say for any service provider, dig into your log material and find where they have gotten in, because they are in there already. Not everywhere, but some places you will find that they are in there. And evidence of this will very often be found in logs. When we investigate post-incident, we very often find that, oh, this is where they came in. It's right there in the logs. And it's very obvious now we investigate in retrospect. It's very, very obvious how they got in there. So I would say, I don't know what they're doing, but I think they should be really digging into their logs with a very critical view, and if necessary, get in some specialist who knows how to do log analysis.
Okay, thank you. That's all from the Instagram followers.
Okay, that's good. We had somebody on the Instagram as well. Yeah, right. General piece of advice at the end of this. Well, building competency is never a waste of time. But if you just build competency without applying it, it is a problem. So this is what we're talking about when it comes to the next course, the courses we're running later this week, right? So I'm just going to pull up the overview slide on that one. I'm still sharing my screen. No, I'm not sharing my screen. So let me share my screen first. And this is probably a bit wider than most of you want to need, but you should. This is basically what we are going to be talking about over 2 days in 9 modules. We are going to go into history because those who cannot remember their past are definitely condemned to repeat it. And we've done many mistakes in the past that we can learn from. We are going to look into what is really computer governance. We are going to look into privacy frameworks. We are going to have a grand tour of cryptography, because we're also going to look into applying cryptography in things like blockchain and how this is done. We're going to look into identity and access management, asset management, taking care of your values, networks and systems. Then, of course, the big problem right now, which is the Internet of Things and future technologies. And if we go back to the Instagram question again, then the biggest difference between Norway and Ukraine is probably that in every household, I think, in Norway, there's at least one Internet of Things devices there, like the smart TV and other things there. I'll tell you one thing, these devices, in terms of security, they're so bad. These are really, really, really bad devices. And they're sitting in every home, and they're sitting in offices. I've seen offices where you can order your coffee from the coffee maker when you stand up from your desk. So when you get to the coffee machine, it's brewed, ready for you. You know, that's an IoT device. It's connected to something. There's obviously a web service in the background of this. And of course, if you can hack that web server, well, then you can make a lot of coffee, right? But you can also use that coffee machine as a bridgehead into a network that you could otherwise not get into, which is why microsegmentation, zero trust, and those principles are very key principles for this. So Internet of Things is something we're diving into, and yeah, and we're also going to have a short visit into cloud services and the weaknesses built into those cloud services. So that's what we're going to talk about later in this week, where we have 2 full days for this.
Yes, to conclude, this week we have this trial course, first course with Stein in Ukraine, and it's probably too late for you to plan your week accordingly, but we will have the second round of the same course in autumn. The dates still will be agreed. It's still far in the future, and also we'll already have people who finish this course to share their feedback with you. And Stein, did you have to also say something else? Because we ran ahead of time, 40 minutes, I think.
Yeah, well, I think we used the 40 minutes pretty well. So I'm not a big sticker for keeping people around when we said everything we need to say. Yeah. I think we covered the topic relevantly. And again, it's up to you guys to ask questions if you want to. You can ask in chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. So anybody? Nobody?
Everyone is keeping questions for the future.
Yes. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I may regret this, but I'm going to put my email in there. I'm not going to put my company email in there. I'm going to put my private email in there. If you have specific questions, feel free to mail me on this one. That's my private email, and I can't guarantee you it's immediate answers, but I can. I will look into things, but please don't ask me how are we going to implement the security in this project here, because I mean I can't step into consultancy role there. But if there are specific questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you so much, Stein, for sharing your email and for this amazing presentation. And time flew quickly in a glance. So thank you very much again for finding your time for preparing for it. So just to conclude, we invite all of you to attend our today's course this autumn. The link for registration will be also in chat. Thank you so much, Norwegian Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce, for the support. And I wish everybody a safe, nice, and good week ahead. Should you have any questions, reach out to any of the organizers, and we will be happy to help you. And Stein, thank you so much again. It was amazing.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I'll call you up.
Bye.
I will call up for a review afterwards, okay?
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.